right, so for those that don't know, for those that are new, this is Staffy. It is not just for People Church staff. It's just what we've always called it, and I can't be bothered getting a new name. And why Staffy? Because we're Aussies, and we either add a Y at the end of it or a Z somewhere. That's what we do. We don't say language properly. We're lazy talkers, and we just shorten everything. So Staffy, staff meeting. It is always a leadership message. It is always directed at People Church culture more than anything. But I also speak these messages with you in mind that are in the corporate space. I've really been defining lately that ministry is not separated by vocation, right? Ministry is something we carry. And ministry is always reaching the lost, feeding the sheep, and equipping the saints. And you will do that in every single workplace that you are in. Yeah. So from Marissa through to the other Marissa Taylor that's here, to Dan, like everyone is always doing ministry. And if we can define that ministry as those tasks, then where you're sitting from and listening to this Staffy is your platform. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the skill sets that you use is often what's going to make a way in order to open up conversations. But at the end of the day, it's all ministry. That being said, it's a leadership teaching. It's not always based on the Bible. It's not a biblical teaching. It's just a leadership or cultural teaching. They're principles that will help you build and succeed in the corporate space, in the athletic world, in the influencing world, and in the church world. So that's the goal of it. Hope you take it in that lens. And today we're going to go on it. We've been on this kind of series of small words I guess I've been calling this series Small Words, Big Impact. So we did big or small, we did yes or no, and today we're going to do now or later.
Ooh, that's good.
Now or later. What I've learned is that ministry is like many other things in life. It is the same as the relationships. You got Melanie Munoz and Xavier as a great example. They were friends for a very long time, but they now have become friendlier. And they are engaged and ready to get married. And the reality is that they've always known they've known each other for years, but the aspect of their relationship being what it is now is a matter of timing. And, most athletic endeavors are timing. Even lifting weights can be a timing thing, whether you're going to be, bring it up quick and then bring it down slow, or the resistance. I forget the terminology for it. Dan's taught me it. But, it changes everything. Golf is a matter of timing. It's not just power. It's not just ability. It's tempo that moves everything. And I think leadership is the exact same thing. I think leadership is a mixture of timing. Yeah. It's not everything in your leadership decisions is a now decision. Yeah, at the same time, you don't want to underestimate that if you mix those two things up, you actually cause problems, because some things are a later and some things are a now. Yeah. If you don't know how to prioritize and categorize those things, what you'll do is you'll wreck what you're building because you're doing later work now and you're doing now work later. And if you can differentiate those two things, both in your marriage and with your children, in your workplace, conversations that you have to have with your boss, conversation you have to have with your employees, conversation you have with your weekend team, conversations you have with your ministry team. It is all a subject of tempo, timing. Yeah. And so I want to go through today some things that in my experience have become now things I've learned, and that often people put them off till later. And then things that are later things that people often do now. And I think everything is a matter of timing. In fact, one of my leadership things I learned as I was heavily in the now, believe it or not. I did everything now. Like, we have to have a conversation, we're doing it now. I've got a challenge, you're doing it now. When do you want this? Now. Like, when are we starting this next endeavor? Now. Everything's now. Why is not now? Now's better. Because if it's now, we're gonna achieve more. And someone once told me, I really believe in pan theory. I was like, what's pan theory? Sounds very interesting. And they said, well, I believe that everything will pan out. And I was like, oh, okay. And I watched that quote. I heard another preacher say, I do everything preemptively. I believe in preemptive strikes. And that resonated with me. And I lived it. The problem is that preemptively is also prematurely. Mm-hmm. And you can correct something before it's got the ability to stand on that correction. Wow. So when you correct everything too early, you often kill things too. Yes. I don't correct certain behaviors in my children because I need those to be corrected later. Yes. Like I didn't want to raise children that are quiet all the time, because by correcting their their ability to speak up as kids, I create an introverted child.
Yeah.
So there is a time for them to know when to not butt into conversation. There is an age for them to know when to understand relational dynamics. But there's also a moment to foster confidence.
Yes.
And by trying to create manners, I could kill confidence.
Yes. Come on.
Yeah. It's great.
So there's this construct that we've got to understand. And I want to put this out there first. Let's lens this. How are we navigating now and later? We're navigating it under the truth that life is not black and white. Since life is not black and white, not everything is simple, not every day you can run the same play. Life is grey. And the way that you navigate grey is with wisdom. And wisdom is the greatest thing. The Bible tells us that actually in all of our getting, get wisdom. In fact, it tells us that it's the one thing God will not hold back, but wisdom is something that he teaches actively. So he does not always just give you, this is the way to go talk to Jack. He teaches you through experience what you have to learn. And now wisdom sets in. Further than knowledge, wisdom sits deep. And wisdom is gained through experiences of life. When God is leading you through every experience with revelation, I think those two things combine and make wisdom. So if that is our lens, let's get into the now and laters. Okay, we're going to do the nows first. Here are a few things that I've learned in my experience that basically... Sorry, I got a text message. Sandra Jones interrupted me. Are you signing off? I was just like, have a good day. I was like, okay. All right, now, things to do now is put your phones on silent. No. Things to do now is praise. I think praise is a concept that we choose to save for later that is actually what we need to live with now. Praise now is life-giving in so many ways. Let's talk about it just personally, and let's talk about it in the sense of the battle, the struggle, the unknown. We often save praise as a reward for what God has done visibly, instead of understanding that praise is what we give God because we know he's working in the unseen.
Yes, amen. Yeah, that's good.
You give God praise, one, because of who he is. He's Yahweh. And whether he did nothing other than give us Jesus or nothing at all, he's still to be praised because it's who he is. Praise is what we give him. Praise to God is alignment to God. Praise to God is defiance of the enemy.
Yep.
Simply there, you're doing something that is powerful. Praise is often what we restrict to because we're waiting for the miracle, right? Like, oh man, when that happens, I'm going to praise him.
Yeah.
But when you understand the concept that I think why I love Genesis laid out so beautifully, and it's a hidden gem, is that God created things and then he formed them.
Yes.
And what I love about that is that you can bank on the fact that when God says it's done, even though he hasn't done it in your time yet. So you praise God because you know it's coming.
Yeah.
You praise God because you know he's good.
Great.
And you praise God because you were made to. Here's what I know about functioning the way you're meant to. It's going to be crazy. It's just easier.
Yeah.
You can try run on all fours, or you can run on the two legs that you were meant to run on. It's just easier. Praise is exactly that way. You will find it easier to get through your trial when you start praising your way through your trial, because your soul needs it. It's hope for the soul. It's affirmation and alignment for your soul. And I speak this first because it is a bit more ethereal out of all of our principles, but I got to say that the Bible makes a connection between what happens internally will make its way externally. We don't often think that way. We forget that the body prospers as the soul prospers. The body doesn't prosper as the task prospers, as the protein sets in, or anything else. In fact, it says that your body prospers as the soul prospers. So your headspace needs to actually go to where your body wants to go first.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as a leader, and this is both a opportunity and a warning, you will not find yourself in infidelity that you haven't dreamt about. You will not find yourself at a quitting point that you haven't first contemplated. You won't find yourself in a room that you haven't first dreamt about. So what happens is that we quite often forget that praise arrests us and puts us back in a place where the soul is aligned to God. And when we're aligned to God, the body goes with it. And I think it's a great thing to understand that praise is something that we must do first. When we praise, things move. The second thing is this: praise is something that you've got to build a team with. We often think that praise might be licensed to give people a big head, or praise might make people take the foot off the accelerator early. Look, that might be so. But don't sacrifice what you should do for something that you don't want to do. Now, let me jump into that concept. Often leaders don't know how to navigate the whole friend-leader dynamic, because if they get too close, people will get familiar. Okay, cool. But what they're really saying is this: I don't like having tough conversations, so I'll stay far enough that you won't ever come close enough to a boundary that I'll have to do something I don't like correcting. So therefore, let me live distant instead of close with actual confrontation. It's got to be had. And the same thing goes with praise. If I praise Kylie now that she worship led so well, she might get really puffed up. But I've seen all these other things that Kylie's got to grow in. So let me not say that Kylie's awesome because she's got these things to grow in. I don't want her to get puffed up. So I've withheld something she needs now because of something that I still have to do later, but I'm reluctant to do it.
That's good.
So praise, quite often we hold it back because we're like, they haven't earned it yet. Let me tell you this. Praise is exactly what we do in the beginning of every meeting in People Church. You can't replicate what you don't celebrate. And if you're not seeing more of what you like in your marriage, you probably haven't made a big deal about it like you should when it happened. We actually are much better at giving feedback at what doesn't happen, and we underappreciate what does happen. So the one time that they do it, we don't hold it back. In a marriage concept, so the one time they speak your love language, the one time they cook, the one time they clean the house, they haven't done it as many times as you. So what do you think? Well, you don't get the praise yet. So now what you've done is you've actually not rewarded a behavior that you want to see replicated, and therefore it goes unnoticed. And if it goes uncelebrated, it goes unnoticed. If it goes unnoticed, it never gets done again. The way you train a dog, I learned, was through praising everything that is even small. Because as you praise the small things, they learn that that's where you come back to. People want to be celebrated because we're made for it. So if you keep praising, people will come back to that. But praise needs the other thing, which we'll talk about in the later. However, don't withhold praise. Praise now. Praise God. Praise the people around you. Praise good behavior. And live a lifestyle of praise. The last thing I'll say is praise the things you did right now. And then use training to go work on the things you know you did wrong later. We often go away from every moment, every preach, every relational talk, every date, every wedding that you do officiate for the first time, every presentation you did in the workplace for the first time, every team you first led, and mostly what we focus on is all the things we did wrong. I want to encourage you, make sure you praise the things you did right and use training to correct the things you did wrong later. Okay? So praise is one of the first things that we often miss. Number 2 is feedback. A lot of people differ with me on this, but it's just my personal preference and I've seen it bring back reward. I like to give feedback now, not later. This is why. If I give you feedback later, then my praise now has been disqualified. Because if my praise comes with a but, then it's not really what it is, right? If I say, hey, that was awesome, but you're waiting for the but, which is my feedback later, then I've just lost power in my praise. Because what I've taught you is that what Chris really thinks and really means, and the feedback that is true will come later. What was said now was just appeasing, making me feel good. Now, it's not comfortable for anybody to get feedback now. That's why some people go, well, people are vulnerable when they just get off the stage, or they're vulnerable when they just finish things. True. However, growth is not for the faint-hearted. So if we're going to try and shield everybody from vulnerabilities, then we're going to shield people from growth. It's just what it is. Now, you don't have to be harsh. You don't have to be horrible. Feedback is an art. And I think feedback that is wrapped up in opportunity and praise is a great way to do it. Never just give people the bad stuff. Give them the good stuff first. And then tell them out. And also, there were these things. But if you could do that, what happens is people can trust your words. And that's what I think in this whole culture of what's safe. Safe is trusting. Safe is not always good and praise. Safe is that I know what I know. I get what I get with you. Haven't you always felt, if you really think about it, safest around the people that you know are as honest to you as they are about you?
Yeah, it's true.
I think too often We praise in front of people and critique behind them. I think a good leader does both in front of the people. That way it is safe. Give feedback now. Why else do we want feedback now? Because what you don't correct now becomes culture later.
Yes.
If you don't correct it now, that's just going to become something later. Feedback is an opportunity to live out that mantra that we say on team here, which is it's not what you preach, but what you permit. Feedback is how we keep talking to each other about where we're at. And it is as simple as every relational dynamic. Hey, we had this conversation last week. Before this becomes something in 5 months from now, 2 months from now, I just want to give some feedback on how last week ran. Now, you don't want to tire people out with feedback. You can excessively feedback, which we'll talk about that in a later. But you do want to live this culture where what you have to say is said in the moment so that people can trust that the moment was authentic. When what needed to be said is said in the moment, I believe that the moment is authentic. Secondly, feedback creates good, correction, culture correction, and guidance. And feedback is a great touch point. What I've noticed is most teams go off task or don't achieve what they need to because the moments of feedback are too far and few in between. People need to know that there's touch points, and touch points create a sharper image than every now and then. So feedback is a great thing for now. Vision is a great thing for now. Quite often we get about what we have to do, not why we're doing it.
So good.
We often try to correct the problems of the team we take over rather than bring vision. Because vision, I mean, come on, it's just here and there. It's just, who cares? It's not that big a deal. But what I'm constantly reminded of is that vision has to be done at the outset. If it's not done at the outset, you've not aligned people to what they have to get to. You've taken away the ability for people to dream. And Jake and I were having this conversation. He and Lauren and Eric and John did an incredible job over their weekend event. Commune Design did an amazing event with great furniture. And Jake was talking. He was like, man, it's funny because I was talking to someone that were enjoying working with us, and the big thing was that they didn't feel held back. And I explained the concept of when you're envisioning, you vision without bounds. Because the whole idea of vision and how it pairs with innovation is that vision creates the standard that innovation has to lift to. But if you envision according to what's already been created, then you're never going to do new. You're never going to do better. You're never going to do bigger. You don't envision according to the technology that exists in Renée. You don't envision according to what churches have already done. You don't envision according to what you think is possible because you've basically just given vision its boundaries. But vision and visionaries are the ones that have taken what once was deemed as never going to happen, can't happen. People don't do that. No one thinks that way. We're never going to get a plane in the air. Vision is actually an elevator of people. It is an elevator of capacity. It is an elevator of task. It is an elevator of strategy. And if you put the thing the other way around and you put vision later and strategy first, well, what you'll do is you'll always limit what you go for. Every room that we lead from in People Church, we start with vision and we decide, is that the right vision and does that inspire us? Right. We will then figure out how we get there. But first of all, we start, is this the thing? Yeah. Does this excite us? Is this where we're going? And honestly, in some cases, I've dropped that and you forget it. Even in Renée, I've forgotten it at moments. But the truth is that it never fails to be true. Yeah. It's a principle that exceeds church or ministry. It is a principle of leadership. I want to encourage you, if you're in the workplace, be that voice. Hey, and if you're in the workplace and you've got a team leader, I promise you that you will go much further than anybody else in that team if in the moments of vision casting, you dream with your boss rather than restrain your boss. If your boss, I promise you, this is what you'll watch happen. If in the meeting there's a whole bunch of realists, you watch how he'll start or she'll start only dreaming with you, talking to you, looking at you, because all of a sudden they found a partner to the vision. Every CEO, every entrepreneur, every boss wants a partner to the vision and an aid to make it happen. If you are a limiter to the vision because all you want to know is how it can happen, you've misplaced timing, because life is about timing. It's both about now and later. You got to figure those two out in order to get it. So vision is always now. Culture. Culture is always now. Culture is never later because of this simple fact. Culture is always happening by default or design. Default culture is the one you don't want to address or shape. Design culture is the one that you have intention behind. There is culture happening in your home every night. I was talking to a parent and they were saying, man, we've gotten in this really bad habit and now we don't know how to correct it because, the kid just, we've kind of pacified them with this. And I was like, I get it. Because when you come home and you're tired, you don't want to deal with a tantrum. That's the last thing you want to do. So it's you want to go to bed eating cotton candy? By all means. Eat till your heart's content and you fall asleep with cotton candy. Whatever, right? Extreme example. For some of you that aren't parents, you're like, what's wrong with that? I don't see a problem with that. You can't parent the same way you uncle or auntie. Ooh, that's a good little message. But I would say that what you often do is you compromise, right? Because you're just like, I'm too tired. Because building anything good takes effort.
Yeah. Yes.
No one just threw paint in at a wall and came up with the Mona Lisa. They might have come with an abstract thing that people see things in, awesome. But some of the greatest things that we have ever seen, even those things, what I've learned is abstract art is not an accident.
Right.
People can think just because they're throwing stuff, it's just all you do. No, there is an art to it, actually. There's a gift, there's an understanding of what you throw when. All that kind of stuff, it matters. And I think culture is the same way. What I've learned with our kids is that it is better to pay the price to hold the line now so that the culture in our home is what we want it to be later.
So true.
And the problem with not addressing culture now is you're creating cycles.
Right.
In fact, let me ask you this as a leader. Do this by yourself and do this before the Holy Spirit. Ask yourself, what are you not doing that has now become a cycle that you don't like living in? It could be as simple as you should do the groceries on Monday and you never do it because you're tired on Mondays. But now it's become a cycle, which means you eat out and you don't eat healthy and it's bad for your budget. Now let's take it to a leadership perspective. Who or what happens every meeting that you say you'll address later that you don't address and now it's become a cultural aspect of your team or your meeting? Every one of us as leaders walk the construct of now and later on the battles that we want to fight. And some battles we think are better later because we're too tired to fight them now. But you don't choose the battles you fight according to energy. You choose the battles that you need to fight according to priority.
That's great.
If you choose the things you'll do in life according to energy, you'll put yourself in a really bad place. You do things according to priority. I don't have the time or the energy for this, but I also don't have the time or the energy to fight this on a bigger scale later. So I got to do this now. I must do this now because culture is either going to become a weight that you carry or a weight that you shape. And it's all going to be determined on whether you do it now. Ask yourself whether the conversations you left for later have actually really given you more time. I'll tell you they won't. The small little rest you got of not correcting it now is nothing compared to the actual strain it brings later.
Yeah.
So make sure that you understand culture is always a now thing. And then the last one in the now category is course correction. Course correction is always better done now, not later. I've learned that, even playing golf, right? Like they go, hitting the ball far is great until you realize that it just compounds and exasperates the problems that you had. Because if you are, like they say, flying a plane, right? 1 degree's off from here to the kitchen, I'm still going to end up at the kitchen. But from here to Australia, I'm now in a whole nother country, whole nother place. The longer you let the course correction go, the further you're going to have to bring something back. Here's the other thing. I remember I've often preached that I've worked with sheep, and it was a really testing moment. And what I noticed is one sheep will run, kick off to the left. The next 7 will do the same thing. Then one sheep is a leader out of 7. and comes in and does a jump in the other direction. The next 12 do the same jump in the other direction. And then all of a sudden we see our next leader at 13 and it just runs straight. And the next 20 run straight. And what we find is that leaders are few and far in between, but they do exist. And a leader without a course correction is a leader setting the course.
That's very good.
It's good.
So you've got leaders that you're raising, and if you're not giving them a course, they will set it by themselves. And next thing you know, the more that you've not corrected someone, and by the way, everybody leads. I read a stat once that even the most introverted person in the world affects and influences 10,000 people in their lifetime.
Wow.
So even the quietest person on your team is being followed by someone else. And we do it all the time. Have you ever been somewhere, you didn't know where to throw something, but you saw someone else throw something somewhere, so you just, I guess this is where we're throwing stuff.
So true.
Just your team misplacing something creates someone else misplacing it.
Yes.
You let that multiply, and now you've got a hoarding situation
Truly.
and a junkyard that you never wanted there. It's funny how a foyer can turn into something that we never wanted it to be because we didn't correct one greeter on a door.
Yeah.
Small things compound. The second thing is small things lay foundations. What you don't correct now becomes a foundation for something else that needs correcting. If what they're doing now isn't what you want it to look like later, just know that there's going to be more of it. So you've got to make sure that course correction is something you do now. There's an art to how we do all these things. That's probably a staffy for another time. But I kind of wrapped it up in the praise thing, I think. If you do your course corrections and you do everything we're talking in the now with praise, I promise you it'll always be received well.
Yeah.
Always think about, don't lead the same way as you lead person on the left. You can't lead the same person on the right the same way. Everyone's got different needs. Eva needs to be spoken to different than Kylie, different than Courtney, different than Maddie, different than Sarah, different than Jimmy, different than Gio, different than Jack. They all need to be spoken to different. The goal is to know your people and know how to speak their language.
Yeah.
But still, in knowing how to speak their language, you need to know how to communicate your message.
Right.
Your message is yours. The language is theirs. Speak your message in their language, and I think that is effective leadership.
Yeah.
Okay. Second area is the leaders. Leaders. All right, leaders. These are the leaders. What have I found to be useful in leadership and building a church or an organization as leader? First thing I'll say that always served me better to save it for later, judgment.
That's so good.
I have found that when two people come to me with a story, it is best to save judgment for later. If I judge now based on one story, I'm only judging on half of what happened. It is always better to judge a situation on later. It's better to judge a politician on later. It's better to judge a marriage and its health on later. It's better to judge a person and their fruit on later. It's better to judge a person and their resume on later. It is better to reserve judgment for later because judgment is sharpest when you have context.
It's great.
When it comes to judging someone, it's best to wait. Why? Because when you understand all they've gone through, you might shift what you actually deem to be the outcome.
Right.
Judgment, I have found, is always best till later. In fact, I held off so long making decisions on what we were going to do with college. Just something didn't feel right. I wasn't sure what's next. We had meetings with Courtney. We brainstormed. We thought. We dreamed. We envisioned. We scratched. We tossed out. We burned. We did everything. And man, I'm glad I didn't set a direction because all the way later, I started getting feedback from students. And I was like, this is great. And in fact, you know what it was? It was so redeeming. I was ready to make drastic changes and all it needed was minor course corrections.
Yeah.
Saving judgment for later is honestly what wisdom brings.
That's good.
Don't judge a person too early. How many times have you thought, I will never be friends with that person and become best of friends with them?
Yeah.
You judged an exterior. And sometimes, fine, first impressions tell a lot, but sometimes they don't tell enough.
Right. That's true.
Some people are really bad texters and great friends,
Yeah.
and some people are really bad first impressionists and incredible people of depth. Save judgment for later as a leader, and you'll build great teams. Because too often you judge someone to be better than they are, or judge them to be worse than they are. Judge them to be wrong, or judge them to be great. and judgment does best with context. So it is better to make, and when we're talking judgment, we're not talking about punitive. We're not talking about whether we judge if someone is holy or not, or whether they come in, but you are assessing, you are making a judgment of every situation you live in every day. That kind of judgment that is not punitive requires time, context, and that is the context in which we're speaking about judgment as a leader.
Come on.
Number 2,
That's good.
I've always found rash decisions are best saved for later. Before you make drastic changes, wait. If you're always changing things majorly, now that is a sliding scale. What's big to someone else is small to you. However, if we're going to, on the generalities, if I keep changing what our church is about and where we're going and all the rest of it, at the end of the day, you're going to give people motion sickness.
Yeah.
Rash decisions show a rash way of thinking. And if you're constantly switching tact, maybe there's something in you that needs to grab to peace, grab to grace, grab to just hold it on a second and understand that not everything needs action now. In fact, action quite often can be like adding fuel to the fire. Action itself is not the resolve. It is the correct action that is. And that often you just need later. Stop making rash decisions. Some of you have a bad week and you quit. And then you think that, I've heard this so many times. This happens so often in leadership, right? Someone has a bad week, bad month, bad year. Because by the way, a year is not that big.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they quit. I'm out. I'm done. And then they say this, my life's so much better since I quit. Hold up a second. Let's just hold on a second. Your life's not better. You're doing less.
Yeah.
Which always feels nice at the beginning. It feels nice to have a break from the gym. It doesn't feel nice to have a year break from the gym and then look in the mirror. It feels nice to not lead that team because leading is weighty.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel nice to live without purpose.
Right. Yeah. Right. Come on.
You've got to know that not everything in the moment is the real cause of the moment.
Yeah. Yes.
So if I'm going to sit there and let's say we have one great weekend on Sunday because, I don't know, Gio used the color red. My rash decision now is red's it. Red's what we've been missing. Logo goes red. Everything goes red. Red. We're wearing red. And it's well, that was an unfair assessment of actually what made it work.
Right.
Why? Decisions that are good and filled with wisdom require themes.
Yes.
And if you're going to make rash decisions because you're just having a bad year, bad month, bad week, and think that whatever root cause you've come up with might not be it. And quite often we throw away so much because we're going through so much. And quite often we change the things that need to stay constant and are not consistent in the things that need to change.
Yep.
That is one of the best things we could do as a leader. I've found that rash is always best for later. Also, what I've found is rash over time goes from rash to thought out. It's that simple. It's rash if you do it now. It's wisdom if you do it later. It's rash now. It's educated if you do it later. The difference is time and context becomes the greatest difference between rash and wisdom. The second one is promotions. The next one is promotion. I have found promotion is best done later than now. There's nothing wrong with promoting later. When you really think, and what I mean is promoting publicly. What I have found, you should only promote what people produce. Never promote hope. What I mean in that is this. I have hope that Jimmy can rise to it, so I'm going to promote him to it. That's a gamble. That's not a promotion. That's not a plan. That's not good leadership. It's a gamble. I should only promote and title what someone is living. Titles should be an affirmative action, not a hopeful action. I can't give Maddie a title that I hope she'll live to. I've got to give Maddie the titles that she is living to. If leaders go first, leaders go before their titles. So rather than hoping that someone will give you, and if you're in this room and you're like, man, I would so do that job if they gave it to me, do that job so they'll give it to you.
Right.
Don't do the job when they give it to you.
Right.
Do the job so they'll give it to you. Be a good leader and people will give you that title. Be a better team leader and build a team. People will give you the title. We want promotions that we haven't earned. We want promotions we haven't worked for. And we want promotions that we haven't proven. Hey, I'm not stopping. Now, also, wisdom in this. You need to delineate in your soul this principle between God said, but then once God says, go do. And see that if God said it, God's people will always affirm God's plans.
Right.
So if you've got good, godly people around you and you feel you're called to it, go about doing it.
Yes.
And can I just say, when it comes to this one is a great mix of now and later.
Yeah.
If you're going to give titles later, well, let's go back to then, what do you do now? Live now like the title you want later.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Can I just speak to anyone on this call that feels that they want to be a campus pastor, or they want to be a CEO, or they want to be a grow group leader? All different requirements for all of those people, all exact same requirements when you say that we're all doing ministry. Can I even put that out there? When we often say that the only people that have stringent requirements around their morality are those in ministry, we forget that we've now, this is what I've got to put this out there. The very same people that will complain that what they do isn't seen as ministry are the very same people that don't want to hold the same actual morality that ministers hold. So they want to be out in the corporate space and call it ministry, but also not live as if it's ministry. But they want it called ministry. Well, no, if it's ministry, and we all do ministry. So therefore we all have the same character. Pastor Eva should not have a different character shift now than what she had before it. And Melanie Munoz should be as much of a Christian as an age group leader as she is at Crate and Barrel.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not saying that she's out there baptizing people at the water cooler. You know what I mean? Like, just dumping on people and it's like, well, you're baptized because I'm a Christian. I'm not going to hide my faith. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about character.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important that we understand that, because then we'd have more workplace ministers. You know?
Yes.
Someone has to know the difference between you and everyone else. I think when it comes to this concept of now and later, okay, and if later is when we give titles, can I just say that, but I am baptizing at the water cooler. Mel, good on you. Good on you.
Totally be doing that.
She really, yeah.
Except Mel didn't even tell them. She just keeps sprinkling them. People are like looking up.
Just blessing people.
She's sending in her pastoral report, 5 baptized this week. I'm going to go jump in the local pool and yell out, baptized. Everyone's in. Everyone's done. So, yeah, I want to encourage you, if you're in this place and you're a future campus leader, you're a future CEO, I want to ask you a simple question. Could someone give you that title today?
It's good. Very good.
Is the greatest detriment to your future the word later?
Come on.
You think you have more time than you have. But if we only title... look at the conundrum we're in. If you think you've got time to be at later, but we only title things you do now, you're going to be waiting forever.
Yeah.
Because I'll never be able to give you a title that you're not living to,
It's good.
and you'll never live to something that won't be given to you.
Come on. So good.
The best thing you could do is understand that promotions need to be given later, because honestly, they're the hardest thing to take away.
Yeah. Right.
It's true.
Once you promote someone, taking them away. In Toronto, I've been super specific with the berries. We're not giving titles. Like, for as long as you can, we just don't give titles.
Yeah.
Because the minute you give a title,
Yes. Yeah.
taking that title away, people get offended. Because too many people find value in their title.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing I'm going to say just on that subject as a cultural piece for People Church, and even anyone that's here, guys. Like, people, when I speak People Church, it's those that work in the four walls and those outside. You're all a representation. Make sure you don't find your identity in your title, because titles don't last.
Right.
Audrey and I will not forever be the senior pastors of this church. One day, we'll pass the baton on. We don't know when that is. It could be sooner than we think. It could be later. But what do? I lived a time where my title was, I'm going to be an athlete. And the minute that was taken away, it's what was a big cause of my mental breakdown. My identity was in that seen it as a dancer, Nos as a college athlete. In fact, his whole business that he was going for was on this fact. Gio, when he hurt his shoulder and he was playing college baseball, like all of a sudden what you were is not what you are, because what you were was the sum of your title, living to it, being known for it, and being praised by it. Find more depth than the things that are annexed to your name.
Come on.
Find more security than the things that are annexed to your name.
Come on.
And if you can find more security, more passion, more drive than the things that are annexed to your name, that's the real essence of leadership.
Yes.
If the only thing that motivates you at the gym is music, then I think you got a problem.
Yeah.
Be unbreakable. And the best way to be unbreakable is not to have more, but to need less.
Come on.
Need less titles to do more work.
Yeah.
Be that person in an organization. The person that needs less confirmation, less affirmation, less praise, but does more than anybody else. That person is hard to top. But the person that is tied and reliant on everything else, I promise you, those things, you can never guarantee your environment, but you can guarantee your state of mind. If you can continue to build on the principles of God and be a strong leader in that way, I think you'll do really, really well. And I think ministry needs it, because some weeks the crowd, the seats are empty. Some weeks they're full.
Right.
And if your identity and worth is based on how many people are there, you're going to be a roller coaster of a human.
Right.
So the best thing you could do is know who you are, irrespective of what you're known for.
Very good.
And that is Staffy on the nows and laters.
Very good. So great.
Hope that speaks to you. We got 8 minutes. Who does now and later well? And which one of these now and laters would you like to ask someone on this call or at this table how they do it? Because you need some practicals now on how to do some of these nows and laters. Who does now and later well here on one of these subjects that you want to ask a question to?
I can hop in. I've asked the question before, but I'd love to hear again any new revelation. Pastor Eva, you're in the room, right? I think I can see you. Yes, okay. I think you do feedback really, really well. And I'd love to hear more for Pastor Chris or anyone else who wants to speak on it. How have you gone about learning the language that will be effective for the people that you need so they can perceive it, or just how do you approach feedback in general? And how have you maybe grown in it? I'm not sure it's always been easy to deliver, but I've received it from you very well.
Oh, wow, thanks, Brianna. Let me gather my thoughts. Well, to what Pastor Chris was talking about, the now and later, I've paid a lot by putting it off for later. So I had to learn to get okay with it and comfortable with it. But I think in any team that you're building, if it's a grow group leader, if it's your workplace, you start everything with the vision and you make it clear to the people around you what it is that you're building, why you're building it, and the values around it. And then you also learn from them. What I think has helped me the most is I share the vision, but then I want to hear what you see and what you want next. So then when it comes time to communicate feedback, we're both aligned on what we said and what we want. And I think
That's really good.
why people often receive it well, it's because it's well, this isn't a standard that I've made up. We're both on the same page.
Yeah, great, Eva.
So it's bridging, it's making what can be broad very personal for the person and understanding, no, we're moving together. So I don't know, it's holding a line, and then it's also relationship is so important, and building trust with them, because the feedback, at the end of the day, this is all about making each other better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last thing I'll say is I'm never too, as a leader you have to learn to be secure in what God has you doing, because I'm always open to learning from you girls, or from the people in my world, so feedback comes both ways.
Yeah.
It's
Ooh,
not
that's
just
good.
me sharing, but also what are
good,
your
Eva.
thoughts? What can I learn? What's something that you want from me or that I could do different? And it's come over time, but I think you can't lead without humility, and when you could do that, the feedback culture, I think it's, I wouldn't say that it's easy to build, but it comes with an ease because it's not about you, it's about the big picture. So those would be my thoughts around it.
It's great.
Yeah, that's great, Eva. Really, really great concepts. I love the fact that she said you got to model it. It's easier to expect it when you model it, and the fact that she invites feedback is great. That's awesome.
I think Marissa.
Marissa Taylor.
Hello. I had a question for Pastor Gio, actually. So, one, I think we've also been walking through a room, and like, you know, on Sundays, and just in general, like, you're able to like perceive things so quickly. And I guess my question is more like, how do you like know, okay, I need to address this now versus like, in like, there's a solution right here, right now, versus like, man, like, this needs to be outlooked over time. Like, what does that balance line look like of like the urgency to like go after it now versus like just trying to like just give it might need more hands or more thought. Like, what does that look like for you in your brain?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something that I've had to like wrestle with for a while, I think, because there's always, like in my space, there's always the opportunity for more. And sometimes it's a doable more and sometimes it's not, right? I think my, where I live, what I live on basically, my foundation for all of it is like, have we tried? And I always like enter the space like trying to understand people because I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the why nots, right? But not living in the practicals, right? So I try to approach everything with like a practical kind of lens, hear people out, understand where they're coming from, and then I don't know, I have like my mind works in the problem solving space really well. And I kind of leverage that to see, oh no, this is actually doable versus it's not, right? And I think there's a little bit of experience there as well. Like as I step into spaces, one thing I try to do is ask a lot of questions, get people's feedback, do my own kind of research, and I kind of mash all that information together and throw out a solution based on that information. I also use it and I pair it with the people, right? So sometimes you come up against difficult people where everything is impossible, right? And you're learning to navigate that and you're learning to push that person. So sometimes it is about just pushing the person and not so much the task, right? And like it's kind
That's
of a balance as a leader to understand that like, yeah, I want the task done and I want to push the church forward, but sometimes it's more important to push the person forward and to pull things out of them that otherwise wouldn't, there would be no opportunity for that. So I always look at it from that lens, like, am I pushing the person, right? Am I pushing the task? And what's the effect of not doing those things for the church as a whole? It sounds complicated, but I think as you like walk into a space and you understand your people, right? The relationship that I would have with people. One thing that Pastor Chris has taught me over the years is like, I don't just walk into space and ask people to do things, right? Like I've tried to become more intentional with like, how are you? How was your week? How was your weekend? How are you feeling? How's Sunday going, right? And understanding those dynamics and building relationship and building leadership capital with every person that I interact with so that when I do have to push them, when I do have to pull something out of them that's uncomfortable, they understand like where I'm coming from, they understand my heart. I think Lobo is a good example of that. I think a lot of times like I can be very direct with him because we've had interactions that we've aligned on where he is going. And we've both spoke that same language. He had invited feedback. I have invited feedback. So when it is time for me to press forward and push more out of him, I have the capital there. So I kind of use all of those things to kind of help, like, now or later.
It's great.
Love it. That was a great answer. Can I just cap off by saying, guys, make sure that you understand that the best way to develop your leadership is to practice it, not simply learn about it. Leadership is like anything else. It's the conceptual meeting, the actual, execution of that. So I can learn all there is to learn about a tennis swing, But it's not until my body starts to align with my knowledge that I've actually become a great executor of that. So you will become a better teller of vision. You will become a better giver of feedback. You will become a better, executor of all the things we're ever speaking about when you do it. And I would ask who here in this call is yet to rise to an opportunity of leadership, with title or without, officially or unofficially, in their workplace, in this church, and in their family, and take these things and start practicing them. You're not going to get them right the first time, and the first time won't be as good as the next time. You're only going to get better. Commit to getting it wrong, embrace the journey of failure, and you'll make your way to a lot of growth if you could do that. So I want to encourage you, get out there and practice this stuff. Go do it in the things that God has called you to. Keep stepping to the things that God has called you to. Do it afraid, and you'll probably be doing it with God. Okay? All right, guys, you are awesome. We will see you Sunday.